Why are the protests happening so much? Not just this one, but it constantly, left, right, center, doesn't matter. Well, I mean, most people would rather do darn near anything than stand on a street corner or a highway waving a protest sign. I mean, time's a precious commodity, and using it to stand jumbled within a crowd while police and many folks passing by are often less than supportive of your efforts, well, it's a sign of desperation. On Monday of this Easter weekend, thousands of Canadians in dozens of locations went out to protest the latest increase of Trudeau's carbon tax. So why are more and more people subjecting themselves, though, to the elements and possibly the long arm of the law with protests across Canada? Well, it's pretty simple. It's because they feel helpless. They're frustrated and they're out of options. You see, in Canada's system, once a person's elected to office, there's no mechanisms for citizens to hold them accountable. No matter how poorly a politician might govern, the people are stuck with them until the next election. Now, some people will say, well, that's just how democracy works, and they kind of have a point. People got the chance to select their elected officials, and they should have to live with their decisions, or at least within reason. There were cases, though, where the politicians grossly misrepresented themselves when applying for the job during an election. And yes, we have a local example in Calgary. Jyoti Gondek has become, and she's managed to become, Calgary's most unpopular mayor in Calgary history, and she's barely served more than half of her first term. Gondek campaigned as a moderate, won the election based on that. As soon as she became mayor, she pivoted into a crazed woke agenda. She ushered in an insane $87 billion climate change plan. She torpedoed an agreement for construction of a new arena. She committed hundreds of millions of dollars to an electric bus program and brought in a single-use plastic ban, which enraged the city when it was implemented. Not to mention how far she went out of her way to piss off our local Jews. Taxes to fund those plans have spiraled as well, of course. Now, had Gondek campaigned on doing all those things in the first place, sure, some citizens would still be upset, when those initiatives came about, but I think they'd be more inclined to accept it until the next election because, well, that's what she said she was going to do. But since Gondek deceptively campaigned as something else, people feel they've been misled and that she should be held accountable for that. A recall petition in Calgary was initiated, and it's garnered a lot of interest. Alas, the legislation for recall in Alberta is terribly flawed, and the bar for successful petitioning is set impossibly high. After months of hard effort, it appears the recall Gondek campaign will have only reached a little more than 10% of the signatures required to force a recall. And that's not to say the petition's been a total failure. It's put an embarrassing spotlight on just how terrible Gondek has been as a mayor, and it's shown how ridiculous the current recall legislation is in Alberta. All the same, though, if recall was the goal, it was an exercise in futility. And many people now are going to feel even more frustrated with the process. Last weekend at a Calgary Flames game, thousands of attendees, and it made national news, booed Jyoti Gondek as she walked onto the ice for a ceremony. And there's been many pearl clutchers, and they've been aghast with the disrespect shown to the mayor. Well, they'd be better served to try and understand why people are so upset in the first place rather than complaining about the people being upset. Citizens are exasperated and they want to show their discontent however they can, even at a hockey game. Federally and provincially, citizens face the same dilemma. There's no way for citizens to remove an elected official, no matter how terrible that official is. Canada's Senate, it's ostensibly the House of Sober Second Thought. It's supposed to hold Parliament accountable. Come on, in reality, the Senate's an insult to democracy, as appointed members act as rubber stamps for the Prime Minister's policies. It's just a patronage pit for old folks to get a really big pension before they fully retire. And while the Trudeau government is an incredibly low level of public support, citizens remain stuck with them as they're propped up by the NDP. And Jagmeet Singh isn't widely popular in Canada either. But through his ugly alliance with Trudeau, Canadians get to enjoy being governed by not one but two parties that don't really represent them. It shouldn't be easy to remove an elected official from power. That's fair. Recall initiatives should have a high bar to be invoked. We don't want to live in a world of endless recalls and by-elections. Premiers and prime ministers shouldn't be removed from power on a whim. While it shouldn't be easy to remove an elected person from power, it should be possible. A report from Canada's RCMP warned that civil unrest is growing and is going to continue to grow in Canada due to bad governance and upset citizens. The government's likely going to ignore that warning. In Canada's system, the lack of accountability among politicians is making people desperate. And as the desperation grows, anger grows. And people are going to feel more inclined to take on dangerous or even illegal ways to express themselves to pursue change. When a person's back against the wall, they will lash out. We're only seeing the warning signs now, and it's going to get worse. We could avoid much of this civil disorder if only there was a reasonable way for citizens to have their voices heard and respected by politicians between elections. Unfortunately, there's little indication that politicians want to change the system in any way that might disempower themselves. So I'm afraid that means things are going to get much worse before they get better.